the hereafter and the day of judgment, the unseen world, etc. The verse, the surah has it, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say He is Allah, the one and only. One and only. So in other words, there can't be two contingent beings. Because otherwise, two necessary beings, otherwise they wouldn't be necessary to begin with. There has to be one necessary being, and everything else is contingent and dependent upon it. So, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say He is Allah, the one and only. Allahu Samad. Allah, the absolute, the self-subsistent. He requires nothing. He is the one that brought everything into existence. He needs to therefore exist eternally. Because to say that He had a beginning would necessitate the same question that we posed for the universe, which would make Him contingent. So you can't go back in the past indefinitely. So Allahu Samad. He is the self-subsisting, the eternal. He requires nothing. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He begets not, nor is He begotten. He doesn't produce anything from Himself. And nor is He produced from anything. And as a result, if you just go through those four rationally, the only inescapable conclusion is وَلَمْ يَكُنْ اللَّهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That He is therefore the one who is the one worthy of being worshipped, if you will. He is the one that requires adoration. So that pull that we instinctually have towards the transcendent, it cannot be diverted towards the creation. So that's one fundamental truth. And
so you would say then, as a result, okay, I'll question
any religion that says that God came down in the form of a human being and therefore that human being is worthy of being worshipped, or that God should be worshipped in the form of idols, or that God is more than just one being, that is three persons in one, or as a Hindu say, Trimurti, three beings. Did he just do what I think he did there? Anyway.
He just put his hand around my face.
Anyway,
let's go.
Exactly. But yeah. So anything that from creation. In fact, I'll give you two in a verse. God says, "Do not prostrate yourselves to the sun and the moon." You find many religions from the past and even today prostrating themselves to the monkey god, to the cow god, to the sun, to the moon, to anything from creation. So God says, do not prostrate yourselves to the sun and the moon, but rather prostrate yourselves to the one who created the sun and the moon, if you are true believers. So from there, the Quran eliminates all those religions that claim to be from God, but are establishing intermediaries in human beings, normal human beings like us, being able to connect with God. Islam, you will never find a single verse in the Quran that speaks about genealogy or lineage being an intermediary for a person being saved.
So I agree with that narrative, but then the Quran is the correct narrative, but what's to say that the Quran itself is correct? What's the proof that, because there'll be parts of the Quran that we don't like, parts that are difficult to deal with?
Absolutely.
Dealing with women in the Quran, in the UK and the West. There's plenty of things.
We've got to move back before he comes and touches me as well.
I'm sure there's plenty of things that she won't like about the Quran, about what it says about women.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, there's going to be certain things that you're going to come across in the Quran morally that you will find objectionable.
But given that the Quran is correct, fine, no problem. But how do you prove that the Quran itself, its creation, is correct?
Yeah, so the Quran itself, I think what makes Quran unique amongst other scriptures is that it is the claim that it has, which other scriptures I don't think either claim, and if they do claim, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The Quran is the only scripture that I know of on this earth that claims to be what's known as ipsissima verba, the very words of God. And if you read, it reads like this is from God. It reads like this is the narrative of God. There's no Muhammad said. Do you know that in the Quran, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is supposed to be the author of the Quran, but though he's not, because we have the speech of the Prophet, and we have the speech of the Quran, and the experts in Arabic, and this includes non-Muslim experts, linguists of Arabic, they say that the speech of the Prophet is nothing like the speech of the Quran. It's like two different individuals. So the Quran is the only scripture that states that it is from God. The Quran is self-referential and it's challenging. In the Quran, I don't think any other religion says this. The Quran challenges human beings. It says, if you believe that this is from anyone other than Allah, then find a contradiction in it. Find a discrepancy in it. And it challenges human beings to do that. And then the arguments, we can look into the arguments. A person comes to us and says, look, mate, I found a contradiction in the Quran. So we sit down, we look at it, we find out whether it truly is a contradiction, and then we go from there. But ultimately, and this is just taking a few steps further on, when we've exhausted those avenues and our arguments against the author of the Quran have been satisfied, then it should stand to reason that morally, the one who revealed the Quran also revealed a moral system that, although initially there may be certain parts to it that you may find unpalatable, but you should treat the truth as it ought to be treated. Truth shouldn't be treated like the flavor of ice cream. Oh, today I feel like having, I don't know, chocolate. Tomorrow it's going to be strawberry. It should be treated like medicine. Our scholars have said that when you go towards the truth, treat it like medicine. That no matter how you have cancer, you are not going to, unless you're mad and you want to just pass away or whatever, you choose to pass away, whatever you want to do. Normally people will want to just take the medicine because they want to carry on their life. They have a responsibility towards people whom they love, and they love him. So the Quran actually has it in it that if you've exhausted all the avenues, then treat the truth as the truth and don't treat it as though you want the Quran to follow you rather than you submit yourself to the Quran. Now and you have many people in the park becoming Muslims. Muslim means the one who submits his will to the will of God. And the reason why that concept is so important is because of the fact that if you believe the truth, you believe you're contingent, you believe you're limited, and you ultimately believe that there's a source out there that has knowledge above which you can't have any more knowledge, power above which you can't have any more power, and all these other qualities, wisdom, then you ought to submit yourself to this being because you recognize that it brought you into existence. Now, you may find certain things in the Quran that you find initially morally objectionable, but if this is the truth, and here's the truth, here's the if clause, and this is where you guys go away, be sincere, look into the Quran, come back here to Speaker's Corner or get in contact with the mosques. Believe it or not, since Palestine, the issue of Palestine, the number of people who are becoming Muslims on account of just looking at the Palestinians living their life through nothing but faith alone, it's incredible. But if you have questions, go and ask. You know, guys, I find this verse in the Quran regarding women objectionable. I find this in the Quran objectionable. Find out why the Quran initially gave this law. What's the wisdom behind it? What are the scholars saying? What was the situation at that time? Sorry, just very quickly. What was the situation at that time that necessitated that this law be brought into effect before eventually perhaps being expunged or mitigated in some sense? So that's in a nutshell.
So the Quran mentions slavery
yes.
a couple of times, and it's sort of accepted as the institution. And it seems, as I've understood it as I read, to be an okay thing. Whereas, so I'm interested to hear your take.
Yeah.
That's the one. There's small things where morally I'll be like, I'm not so sure about that, but I can understand.
You're being kind here. I think it's a big thing for you, and it is a big thing for other people.
Yeah.
But the Quran, you have to understand the milieu in which the Quran was revealed. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he came down with the message, when he was sent the message, I should say, at the age of 40, the peninsula at that time, the world at that time, was rooted in the concept of slavery. There were wars taking place left, right, and center, and this is also true of the pagan Arabs of that time. They would go to war at the smallest of excuses, and that war would carry on for centuries to the point where they would come together and they wouldn't know why their ancestors got into a war. But the idea that they had at that time was that if you have the audacity to raise your sword against us and you want to exterminate us, if we end up winning, we're going to take your spoils. And this is true of the Roman Empire, this is true of the Chinese Empire, this is true of all people, and this is, don't take my word for it, this is on camera, just go do your own research. You'll find that the world was steeped in this concept, that you can take the women folks and the children and anything because they chose to either attack you or you chose to attack them, and you can take them in this way.
So the historical context gives precedent to the Quran sort of just laying the land as it was at the time.
Laying the law
for the land as it was.
Exactly, laying the law for the land and educating the masses towards a particular end. So, for instance, let's take a parallel example, which you guys may not find as unpalatable. In fact, you guys might find it delicious. But in terms of its moral outlook, it would be equivalent to something that many people who don't drink alcohol will find objectionable, perhaps even more so than slavery, because alcohol is one of the prime reasons why there is so much money wasted on year in a society which makes alcohol permissible to drink. 71% of all crimes in the UK are committed, 70-odd% are committed under the influence of alcohol. And they recognize that alcohol is a poison. They recognize it should be now drunk in proportions. In the past, it was recommended that we drink alcohol, a certain amount of wine, because it's apparently supposed to be good for your heart. Only for them to make a U-turn 20 years later, and I was using this argument 20 years ago, did a U-turn on this, saying that no, what we thought was good for you is now bad for you. So just to give a parallel to this. Now the Quran didn't come and say to the pagan Arabs, alcohol is forbidden for you, and that's it. Destroy all the alcohol barrels that you have and give up alcohol. Why? Because the pagan Arabs were just as steeped in the imbibing of alcohol as other societies. It wouldn't make sense to take a people whose entire society was established upon a particular way of life and who were making money from this, to say to them, you know what, get rid of every evil in one fell swoop, and let's go down the path of truth. They'll pull out the sword and probably get rid of that man there and then. There's no wisdom behind it. Just like when you talk to people who are addicted to alcohol, they'll go to something like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a gradual process, because they know you take something away from the people who are addicted to something, they'll end up committing suicide or killing themselves.
Transition reasonably away from it.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess that narrative stands for slavery as well.
And the slavery was such an embedded concept in Arabia that the Prophet said he laid down certain laws, and then he laid down certain ways of being able to reward, encouraging the Muslims to gain reward, better themselves through manumission, which is helping a slave acquire his or her freedom. There were various avenues laid down. So slavery was slowly but surely brought down to a minimum, but it was never eradicated. It was never eradicated because the one who knew human beings better than we know ourselves knew that slavery will continue to be an endemic part of human society over the course of history, as it was established before, during, and it continues to be today, to this very day. And I can pull out stats that I have to hand regarding how slavery manifests itself in various forms. But the Islamic laws regarding slavery, they allow us to navigate this, whether it was 1,500 years ago, just coming on 1,500 years ago, when human beings were relatively, how can you put it, sort of more sincere towards the truth, as opposed to today, where human beings have so much choice that there's just confusion all over the place.
So does the Quran then explicitly state, well, on the one hand, yes, there's this transition away from something that's embedded deeply in the society at the time, but does it explicitly state that it is objectively wrong?
Yes.
Yeah.
So slavery is something, by its very nature, it is wrong. And that's clearly indicated by the fact that if you have a look at the laws that the Prophet Muhammad laid down regarding slavery, for instance, he described the slave person that the companions had. He said, this is your brother. Feed him with what you feed yourself. Clothe him with what you clothe yourself. It came to a point that there were certain slaves who, when they were given the choice to acquire their freedom, give them money and go out into the real world, they said, nah mate, I'd rather stay with this man because this man has educated me in Islam. He's like a brother to me. These are words from the slaves themselves. They said, no, we want to stay in this way, because they felt in their best interest, I've got a roof over my head, I'm being treated like a brother. They weren't really treated as slaves. There's a famous story of Umar, who was a second caliph. He was walking with his servant. As he was walking into the city that I think it was the city or the town that he was going into, the servant was on the horse, or the donkey, and Umar was the one that was pulling the horse, the lead. So the man came out and he went to the slave and went, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, oh leader of the faithful. And he said, so in other words, the Muslims had this deep understanding that there are going to be consequences to how we behave in life. And it's not enough to just simply talk the talk if you're not walking it. So in the Quran, it is, the Prophet Muhammad, he said very, very clearly, he said, every action is but by intention. He said, the Prophet described intention, he described it as an ant walking on a black rock on the darkest of nights. And he described it as a shirk al-riya. He said that it is that association of partners that is so subtle that some human beings, they don't even realize that when they're worshipping God, they may be doing it to show off to other people. So the Prophet said, anyone who does an action that is not intended purely for the sake of God, it will not be accepted from him. And he said that the one who does it for whatever reason, it's for that reason. So he said that whoever migrates for God and His Messenger has migrated for God and His Messenger. But whoever migrates for worldly gains has migrated for worldly gains. In other words, that guy hasn't benefited from his worship. So in Islam, one of the things that has allowed our worship of God and our commitment to the moral values to remain the same, and I don't believe that this stands true for any other religion. You see that brother there worshipping God? Jesus, you're fine, walked a little further, and he fell down his face and he prayed to God, oh my Father, if it be possible for you to allow this cup to pass, then let it pass, but not as I will, but as you will. This is the prayer of the prophets and messengers. Jesus walked a little forward. This is from the Bible, by the way. I'm not quoting from the Quran here. The Prophet Muhammad, he taught us how to pray. He taught us to place our head into the fetus position. And he said the one who is in sujood, the one who is in prostration, he is closer to God than at any other moment in time. So ask of him what you will. So you'll find a lot of people, when they become a Muslim, they just fall down. They want to prostrate because they recognize that there's no more. Have you ever tried prostrating, maybe in meditation? It's an experience.
It's a surrender.
It's a surrender. You're surrendering your mind, your body. Very few people have actually prostrated. It's a fascinating question to ask.
Very humbling.
It's very, very humbling. Now, juxtapose that with belief in God. Juxtapose that waking up in the middle of the night when everyone else on the earth is sleeping or in your region is sleeping, and you're doing it only for the sake of God. That is the level of iman that the Prophet said. He said, it is as though you see Allah. But though you do not see Allah, know that He sees you. It is that moment where the person may talk the talk, but when the doors are closed and you have to take care of yourself, that's when true faith is tested. So Islam came to holistically teach us how to worship God and also how to behave in life on a balanced way. The Prophet, and when I say this to people, you often find them saying, really? He said this? Because the way Islam has been portrayed in the media, that it is a religion of extremism. Did you know that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that halaka mutanatti'un, halaka mutanatti'un, halaka mutanatti'un. Do not go to extremes in your religion. Do not go to extremes. Destroyed are those who go to extremes. Destroyed are those who go to extremes. Destroyed are those who go to extremes. The Prophet ﷺ told us not to go to extremes in anything. There were 3 men who came to the Prophet's wife. They said, how does the Prophet live? And the wife told these men, this is how he lives. The men, out of a sense of misplaced piety, one of them said, the Prophet prays, I'm going to pray the entire night and I'm not going to go to sleep during the night. The other man said, when he found out that the Prophet fasts, he said, I'm going to fast the whole day for the rest of my life. In other words, because they fast from sunrise to sunset. And the third one said, from this misplaced sense of piety, this misunderstanding, he said, and out of ignorance, he said, I'm not going to marry women. So the Prophet, when he heard this, he said, who are these people? And these people came to him. And he said, I am the Prophet of God, and I fear God more than you. I fear God, don't worry about it. He said that I fear God more than you. He said, I sleep part of the night. I worship part of the night, and I sleep part of the night. I fast on certain days, and I do not fast on other days. He said, and I marry women. And he said, whoever does not follow my path, my sunnah, he said, he's not from me. He's not from me. So he's teaching here that don't go to extremes in your religion. He said, don't go to extremes in your religion like the Christians took the grave of Jesus as a place of worship. On his deathbed, when he was in the pangs of death, one of the things he said, curses be upon those who took the graves of their prophets as places of worship. He cursed them. So he's in a delirious state. but his one sole purpose is to continuously remind his nation, your purpose in life, no matter what else, is that you die upon Islam and you die upon the true worship of God, and you maintain this. During the last sermon, I'm not sure whether you've ever heard of the last sermon of the Prophet, where his mission is almost complete. He's 15 years ago, roughly, he's been kicked out of his city of birth, Mecca. He's been forced to migrate to Medina. He's now come back and conquered Mecca. But the conquering was one of almost, apart from those zealous youth, a few of them, handful who came out and they were killed as a result. There were Muslims who came in tens of thousands. I think it was 10,000 Muslims who came towards Mecca, and the sword wasn't lifted. And the Prophet, he came on his horse or his donkey. He came in this situation. He came in the position of humility, and he walked into Mecca, and he went to the Arab pagan leaders. He said, "What am I going to do to you, O leaders of Mecca?" The Arab said, one of the leaders, he said, that we know you to be a kind man. I'm paraphrasing it. We know you to be a kind man. He says, indeed, you are free and your household is free. So at this juncture, he brings all his followers together. There's 10,000 of them, and he addresses them. And the addressal is what impressed a man by the name of Malcolm X, which I'm sure you've heard of. Malcolm X, when he read this, he recognized the truth of Islam, not the truth of the nation of Islam, who claimed, similar to the Christians, that there is a black man who came down in the form of a man, and that he is God on earth, that he is incarnate. No. Malcolm X, he went to Saudi Arabia and did the pilgrimage, and he came across this speech from the Prophet, who said that there is no superiority of a black man over a white man, nor is there superiority over an Arab over a non-Arab, except through what? Piety and good deeds. It is the heart, the piety that the person does, the intention of how we worship God, that sincerity that I told you about. So Malcolm X, he goes away and he writes to his wife. He says, I have come to a place during the pilgrimage, because the pilgrimage is one of the most extraordinary events on earth. It has been going on unchanged since the time of Abraham, upon whom be peace. People from all walks of life, they come together, black, white, rich, poor, they all wear the same garment, and you can't tell the difference between rich or poor. He said, when he went there, he said, I have drunk from the glass of a man whose eyes are the bluest of blue and whose skin is the whitest of white. But the white attitude, the racist white attitude, has been extracted from his heart. He said, if there is a true message that will be a cure for the racism of America, it is Islam. It is Islam. Now, Malcolm X said this. If you read his biography by Alex Hale, I think his name is, you'll find it in there. There's a new one by Manning, who's also written it. But the point here is that Islam came to eradicate racism, and it brought people together on a brotherhood and sisterhood that only judges person by one thing only: your closeness to God through your piety and through your obedience to Him. That in a nutshell is the message of Islam.
So what would you recommend then to people who are, like myself, who are in the process of trying to decide for themselves that this or something else is the truth? What's the best way to approach it?
The best way to approach it that we can ever give to anyone is what you guys already have: the Quran, the Book of God, the very words of God. You open those up, instantly you'll be able to recognize that this does not read like the Bible. It doesn't read like the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindus. It doesn't read like the Vedas. It doesn't read like the Guru Granth Sahib of the Sikhs. So the book itself will be hopefully an evidence for you. But I would say ultimately, be sincere. And don't, in the Quran God says, call upon me, I will answer your call. No intermediaries. You don't go to the Catholic priest to confess your sins. It's a direct relationship between mankind and God. So be sincere, go home, be open in the way you are looking for the truth, and we would say, inshallah, God will guide you. God will guide you. Ultimately, God will guide you. If you're sincere, God will, inshallah, guide you. Just to give you an understanding, if your background is one of Christianity, then there's glad tidings that the Prophet gave to the Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. He said, there is not a Jew or Christian who hears of my message and accepts it, accepting that I am the messenger of God, and accepting that Jesus, son of Mary, is a messenger of God, and a word that proceeded from God, accept that God will forgive all of their sins. God will forgive all of their sins, and He will take their good deeds and multiply it by a factor of 10 to 700. So that's the glad tidings that the Prophet Muhammad gave to the children of Israel, as well as the followers of Christianity. That you're not losing out ultimately by becoming a Muslim.
Nice incentive.
Yeah,
Nice
very good incentive. And this is what Islam is about. The Prophet ﷺ, in fact, one of my friends who comes to the park, he said that one proof that caused him to convert from Christianity to Islam was the following tradition of the Prophet. The Prophet said that the one who has the intention of doing a good deed, but doesn't have the opportunity of transforming that into action, he will get one reward for it. But the one who has the intention of doing a good deed but ends up doing it, it will be multiplied by a factor of 70 to 700, and even more. But the flip side, and here comes the mercy of God. The one who intends to do an evil deed but doesn't end up doing it, stops him or herself from doing it, they'll get one good deed, one good reward. So the incentive there is, look at the mercy here. Everything's stacked up in our favor. If you do good deeds, the mercy of God is immense. If you do an evil deed, you'll get one bad reward. If you have the intention of doing a bad deed and you don't do it, you'll be rewarded for it. One of the traditions of the Prophet, he said that Allah has, from His mercy, established mercy in 100 parts. One part He sends down to His creation. From that, the mother bird goes off in the morning, comes back and feeds its young, and the horse, I think it's the horse, doesn't trample upon its young. In other words, the general mercy that God sends down upon human beings allows us to have this empathy that we naturally see amongst human beings, irrespective of their religion. But the 99 parts God said He has reserved for His believers, for mankind, for His believers. But there needs to be a qualification. That qualification is that you testify with your tongue, believing in your heart, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that there is none worthy of worship in truth. Just pay attention to this final thing. There is none worthy of worship in truth except the one and only true God, Allah. With that comes all the principles, all the knowledge of how to worship God, how to live your life, and that that there is none worthy of being followed in truth except Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, the last and final messenger. The Prophet said that there is no prophet between Jesus, the son of Mary, and Muhammad. We all come from the same lineage, but our mothers are different. We come from the same lineage. So the prophets and messengers that came with the same thing. And God says in the Quran, "O my slaves who have transgressed against their own souls, don't despair at the mercy of your Lord. Do not despair at the mercy of your Lord. For your Lord, He forgives all sins." He forgives all sins. Something like that verse gets me, because it's an indication of the mercy of God that He says, He's addressing you, all of us. "O my slaves, do not transgress, do not despair at the mercy of your Lord. For your Lord forgives all sins, for He is the oft-forgiving, most merciful." The only sin He will not forgive is the sin of associating partners with God, what's known in Islam as shirk. And it is the greatest crime against God, because you're taking a right that is exclusively of God, and you're giving it to other than God. Whether it be Jesus, whether it be Muhammad. There are Muslims who worship Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, unfortunately. Whether it be idols, whether it be the sun, the moon, anything from creation, you're giving a right to God, to other than God. And God says the one who dies upon this will not be submitted into Jannah, provided the evidences have been established against them. So that's the message of Islam. So you guys go away.
Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah, sure.
I was just thinking about it as you were speaking. You cannot ascribe human attributes to God, but you ascribe mercy and compassion. So are these not human attributes as we understand?
Very good question. In Islam, our understanding is that there is not a thing that exists, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is not a thing that exists except that it has to be qualified by attributes. There's nothing that exists that can just exist, sans attributes, minus attributes. Everything has attributes. Whether it be this book we would say has the attribute of time, because it's within time. Its time is relative to your time. Your time is relative to his time. His time would be relative to my time if I was traveling on a rocket approaching the speed of light. So we have the attribute of time. We have the attribute of wisdom. Human beings have that innate attribute that distinguishes us from the rock. We can think at the abstract level. We have knowledge. But the attribute doesn't exist as in a vacuum. We don't, so for instance, like I said to you, the hand of a clock. No. If I said to you, hand, you're not going to immediately think hand. Hand of a clock? Yeah. You're going to think anthropomorphically, aren't you? You're going to think hand. The first thing that's going to come to you into your mind is that which you have known all your life, human hand. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But what is that human hand attached to? It's inexistent. In other words, attributes don't exist in and of themselves. They are attached to an essence. And you have to know what the essence is before you can interpret what the attribute is. So if a person says to you, hand of a clock, immediately you've got a context. You know that the attribute is being attributed to what? An object known as a clock. And that attribute is different from the hand of a clock, or the hand of a monkey, or the hand of whatever. So that's how we interpret the attributes of God. The essence is the thing to which we understand the attribute. If the attribute is the attribute of mercy, we don't say that there's no similarity. Anyone who tells you that there is absolutely no similarity between God and His creation, either they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't understand similarity. There is, by the very fact that you're using the very term mercy. But it's what in English would be referred to as polysemy, that an attribute is left undefined until you know the context.
Right, so you would say that the mercy we can exert as human beings
is different.
Is not defined the same as the mercy God can exert.
Precisely. That's exactly it. The essence is unique of God. It is unlike our essence. We don't have an understanding of what that essence is, but we can have knowledge of what it is, though we can't encompass that knowledge. So when God said, for instance, that He's merciful, the most merciful, that mercy is so unimaginably great that it's almost incomparable. But we understand that He has mercy. You know, God says in the Quran that He has knowledge. He has knowledge such that even if you had a pen and you wrote it down, you would require not one sea but two seas before it's exhausted. It's an analogy, but it's describing the immeasurable content of the Creator in comparison to us who are living on this mud ball in an incredibly diverse universe, the extent of which is just breathtaking. In fact, the Quran again tells us to look in. It says to look into the furthest horizons and within yourselves until it becomes manifestly clear to you that this is the truth. And is it not enough that your Lord is a witness over all things? Is it not enough that He knows everything? The Quran says, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where then are you going? Where are you going in life? Where are you meandering? There must be a purpose. There has to be a talos. أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ? Is there any doubt in God? فَاطِرِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ? The originator of the heavens and the earth? The originator of all that exists? Yeah. All of these things are there. You'll find that the Quran, if you read it, it'll jump from one subject to the other, and it'll have you engaged. And remember, this was revealed piecemeal over a period of 23 years. So the Prophet knew through the knowledge of God where each verse would be placed. So that's the message of Islam.
Probably keep asking you little questions all day, but I'm sure it's good.
Maybe we're here, so you know what I mean. Just come back. You're very welcome. What's your name?
Lorna.
Lorna?
Matthew.
Matthew? Hamza?
Hamza, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Take care, guys.
No one looks like him.
Brother.
While I was waiting to continue, my book what it says.
Brother, where's Allah Barak? Where's the other?
After a long time, got you continue.